Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael, and I am the director and producer for Fridays at Noon here through the Department of Human Resources at the University of Denver. This week's topic, Ken and Greg will be discussing how to manage up. If you guys are curious on how to effectively convey a message across to your manager or supervisor, definitely tune into this week's topic. So without further ado, let's go see what Ken and Greg have to talk about in regards to managing up.
You know, in the work I do, one of the terms I hear a lot from people around campus is managing up.
Yeah.
And that can convey a lot of different connotations, but it's something that is often present in people's minds when they're working with their own manager. When you hear that term, what comes to your mind?
Well, and I'm sure you found too, Ken, and I'm sure our audience has, that term is becoming almost overused, and I don't know if anybody actually knows what it means anymore.
Yeah.
So before we had this conversation, you know, I went and did a literature search. And oddly, what a lot of the literature said, and I'm talking Harvard Business Review, Forbes magazine, you know, a lot of the top magazines, that managing up was more of a career strategy where you endear yourself to your boss, so to speak, so much so that you make yourself indispensable. And by doing that, you get heard more, you can have greater opportunities made available to you and things like that, so it becomes a win-win for both parties. Personally, that's not exactly how I saw managing up. I mean, was that kind of how you see it?
Well, you know, you mentioned some very credible sources, you know, Harvard Business Review and such. And I think one of the connotations of trying to endear yourself in that way could have a negative. It could kind of backfire on people in terms of perception of them trying to kiss up to their manager. So that kind of raises that, but some of the other aspects of managing up.
Well, the way I've seen it the most, and the way I've been actually helping people here at DU, you know, in coaching, is when there's sometimes there's a strain between the manager and the employee, or other times the employee's just not getting their needs met from their manager, and they're not sure how to maneuver that conversation. So I think that kind of falls under managing up as well.
Well, sometimes the employees have to be, for lack of a better term, almost the more mature or secure enough in themselves to do that, because it can be done in a professional, appropriate way. It's not just
and that's what we'll really talk about in this session. The one thing I want to emphasize, though, is managing up does not necessarily mean you have an ineffective manager. I mean, it doesn't directly equate to mismanagement, because a lot of times a manager will bring somebody in who complements their skill set, and they look for them to kind of manage up, even though maybe that's not spelled out that way.
I would agree. And hopefully leaders, especially the emotionally mature ones, are more comfortable doing that. And comfortable in their own skin, I guess you might say.
So what I want to do is just share a real story that I experienced many years ago when I started out as a manager. And it was a classic situation of where I wasn't getting my needs met. And then we can kind of dissect the story a little bit. Because maybe this will help. I had one of those incredible opportunities of working for the third largest nonprofit in the world. And it was a nonprofit that provided educational resources on leadership, public speaking, you know, a whole bunch of things like that. And I was a huge fan of this organization to begin with. So when I had a chance to work for them, I just jumped on it. And when I met with the guy that I replaced, he said something to me in that original meeting that ended up foreshadowing kind of the relationship I was going to have, and I had no idea at the time. And he said, "By the way, Greg, when Terry, who's the executive director, when he calls you and tells you to come down, grab a yellow pad of paper and get down there right away." And I remember just kind of, you know, I was still in that new stage. I'm like, oh, okay, sure.
The honeymoon phase.
Thinking in my mind, that's the least of my worries. You know? Okay, whatever, I'll grab the pad of paper, you know. But little did I know how much this was going to come into play. Because what ended up happening is, as I was there, I started to develop kind of a love-hate relationship with my boss, the executive director. And the love part was, he was the most charismatic guy. He was a gold medalist in the Olympics. You know, he, in front of an audience of whether it was 20 to 500, would just bring people to tears and emotions, and everybody would come up to me afterwards and say, "Boy, are you lucky to work for this guy?" And and I would smile, but in the back of my mind I would say, "If you only knew."
Right.
but there was that part that I really loved about him.
Yeah.
But then the hate part, and it's not really hate, but that part was, and where the mismanagement occurred in my case was, here's what he would do. He would, when he needed you, he would call you and say, "Get down here," or "Can you come down now?" And it was never "Hello, how are you? How was your weekend? When you get a chance?" It was, "Get down here right now."
And that sets the tone for the whole interaction.
Not only that, it felt like a parent-child dynamic, like right off the bat. And ironically, though, the parent-child part of this played out even more because, to get to his office, and of course I didn't know what he wanted. I didn't know if I was in trouble. I didn't know if he wanted to report, if he wanted to act. I had no idea. I felt very, very vulnerable. But it wasn't just a hallway like we have in HR. This was like the other end of the building. So it's going through a maze, and then a hallway, and then a really long hallway, and then you pop out in front of his administrative assistant who was grouchy a lot. And their comment was, "What do you want?" Kind of like that. And
runs in the department there or something.
Yeah. And so, and the difficult was I'd walk in there and he'd be like, "What about this? And where's this?" And I would be so flustered because I'm like, "Well, I have to go get a report, or I have to go find out. I have to go get back to you." And it just felt almost in a way demeaning. And I got very, very frustrated by this dynamic, and it happened over and over again. So the other managers, for whatever reason, seemed to be okay with that. But here's a strange thing. Every Friday we would sneak out of the office at lunch, and we'd sneak out, me and the other managers, we'd sneak out because we didn't want Terry to see us because he didn't invite himself along. Well, and the reason we didn't want Terry is because at these lunches, we would talk about Terry. We'd tell Terry stories. And this was kind of the norm that I walked into. And and I found that it was almost like comic relief for people to kind of vent, and here's another thing he did, and here's another thing, and I would sit there and I'd be like, I don't know, something's wrong about this. And it's not that they were talking about Terry so much as I'm thinking, yeah, but what about my situation? So I put it out there to my fellow managers, and they laughed, and they said, "Dude, the last guy that did that was shown the door by Terry. And that, take your risk if you want, but just figure out a way to work around this."
So they worked with avoiding and also then enabling Terry to behave in that way.
And oddly, they were very happy.
Yeah.
But I wasn't.
They made it work.
And maybe because it was a visceral thing, but I felt like, because I was trying to think, what are the issues I'm having here? One is that he abruptly says, "Get down here," so that kind of parent-child. And I should mention, when you go in his office, I mentioned he was a gold medalist, right? He was a short man, very, very athletic, and he had this big desk and two little chairs in front of his desk. And you literally would sit there and look up at him. So the parent-child thing just kind of continued in these conversations.
Sounds like my office.
Yeah, just like your office.
With the gold medals as well.
Yeah, with those little kid chairs.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I forgot what I was saying. So there was not knowing what he wanted. Yeah. There was the abruptness, felt kind of rude in a way, and there was this parent-child perception. So these are all the issues I was kind of struggling with. And clearly my peers were not going to help me through this. So I had to do some deep self-reflection. And, we're going to talk later about Rule 6 of 8 simple rules to managing conflict. Right. And Rule 6 is ask for what you need. Well, that's kind of what I ended up doing in this situation, because I had to think, what was triggering me so much? Was it the rudeness? Was it the being unprepared? Was it the long hallways and having to go back and forth? Not an efficient use of anybody's time. Yeah. And the conclusion I came to is I could deal with the rudeness. I could laugh that off, really, because that's part of his personality. But I felt so vulnerable going down there because I didn't know what it was about. And so when I looked at what need was not being met for me, it was feeling competent. That's really what it came down to, is that by not knowing and just having to rush down when he snapped his fingers, I was vulnerable. And so I thought, okay, so how do I feel competent then in that situation? What would that look like? And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? Very simple. If he could just take 2 more seconds and tell me what it's for.
Right.
Set the context of why he needs me. Then I could grab whatever file, whatever I needed. I could think about it for the long 3-minute walk to his office, and I could walk in there being much more prepared. So, okay, so I figured out what to do, but now the scary part. I had to say it to him. I had to manage up.
Right.
And so here's how I did it. And, put yourself in Terry's shoes and see if in any way, what I say would work or not work for you. And the key thing about managing up is to not make somebody wrong. It's to not criticize. It's to get to the lower level, which is what need is not being met, and find a way to either ask for it or make a suggestion. So we have this meeting. I'm sitting down there looking up at him. The meeting's about to end. He says, "Is there anything else?"
Great.
And I feel I'm like shaking. I'm like, actually, there's one more thing. And I'm breathing, heavily, because in my mind, I'm remembering my peers saying, the last guy that tried to give him feedback.
Yes.
And he goes, "What?" And I go, "Do you know what would be very helpful to me?" And he said, "What?" I go, "When you need me urgently, if you could just take a second to tell me what it is you need, that way I could grab the file, or I could be prepared when I get in your office and not waste any of your time and have a more efficient meeting. Is that something you'd be willing to do?" That's what I said. And he says, "Sure." I'm like, sure. I spent
it's almost
6
a
months.
letdown. You were ready for the next round.
6 months, frantic about this whole thing. And he said, "Sure." And the beauty of that is, because some people go, "Well, is that a form of manipulation?" Well, no, not really, because I talked from a deeper level of what need wasn't being met, and I posed it in a win-win scenario, which is a critical component of managing up, to where he could almost not say no. And it wasn't a criticism, so he didn't get defensive. He didn't show me the door.
Because you were focusing on yourself, not a deficiency in that person.
Yeah, and by walking out of there, he benefited too from my suggestion. So why wouldn't he agree?
Yep.
And so that's kind of an example of what I did, and kind of essentially a form of managing up.
And right within that story and illustration is the idea of asking for what you want or need. Because I know in working with people, they're very hesitant to do that. So most often they don't. Yeah. And they kind of succumb to that parent-child kind of managerial mode.
And a lot of managers never get feedback. They never solicit feedback. In a perfect world, the manager would be going, "How are you doing? Is there anything I could be doing better to help you grow and develop?" But a lot of times that doesn't happen. And so then the onus is on the employee to figure out, how do I maneuver through that without getting in trouble or making them seem like I'm giving them a criticism. So the keys to managing up, and then we want to talk about our relationship real quick, about how I manage Ken.
All the time.
Manage up to Ken. The key is first, know what you need, then why you need it, because how it's going to benefit you, and then how you would share that with the other party, your boss, in a way that it benefits them as well. So it's a win-win piece. And then figure out, do you want to say it in a question or in a request? And what that might look like. And it's not even a bad idea to practice. And certainly, like a lot of the literature says, the more you know your boss, the more you can kind of know what he or she values, and you can incorporate that into the win-win part of it. But so that your boss sees it as a benefit to support you in that particular way.
Well, and that first point is similar to last week when we were talking about conflict. Knowing your end goal, this is, knowing what you want out of that interaction.
Similar themes. All right, so let's talk about us. Now, I think what's unique about our relationship is that we communicate very well with each other.
We do.
And I know that's not always the case in other relationships. So as a result of that, how I manage up with you is I don't manipulate. I don't think this way, because we have a partnership and kind of how we work together. But I use a lot of we and combined goals that we have together, and I throw those out as the reason why we need to do this, or we should get on this, or those kind of things, because it's something that we both benefit. It benefits the people that we impact, and I put it in a way that, Ken, we got to, even this morning, we got to get going on this, or why don't we do this? And those kind of things, just like the same things you would say to me.
And what I find in that, we do know each other, and that helps. But many managers know your employees, and so there's a level of trust. But also my focus, as your manager, is I'm focusing on what we've brought you here to do. Yeah, that's what matters. Yeah, and you matter. Yeah. But that's what matters, and so my focus is on, all right, where is this project or this event? So I don't find when you do that in a difficult, or I don't take it personally. Yeah. And so it reinforces to me that managers can learn just as much from their employees as vice versa. Yeah. And
if they're in the habit of asking, there'll be a lot less managing up. It's more of a partnership, just ongoing, where there's little effort. Like, I don't have to think about how to mechanically phrase a sentence to you so you won't feel like, I'm judging you or putting you on the spot, because we have the kind of relationship that, bypasses that. Yeah. But I know not everybody has that. And a lot of the coaching I do here at DU, I'm helping employees manage up with their boss by figuring out how to wordsmith something so they can at least get it on the table and have that conversation. And of course, our goal over time in the professional development world, is to use 360s to do the management training certificate programs, to get managers so they're soliciting that more and more and more, and then everyone's on the same page from the beginning.
Yep. And I just think it's so important that people, if you take one thing from this session, is that it is okay to ask for what you want, and that is not in any way, insubordinate or inappropriate. It's being actually an adult professional person in the workplace.
Yeah, and keep in mind, what some managers are going to want to know is, and how does it benefit the group? How does it benefit me? How is this a win-win suggestion? And that's the key to managing up, is for them to see the bigger picture. And, like in our relationship, if you go back to where we started with the traditional definition of managing up, we kind of rely on each other, so we're kind of each other's go-to person. Right. And that's the ultimate goal of having that kind of relationship.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, so thank you for listening and for being part of Managing Up. Next week, we're going to talk about Rule 2 of 8 Simple Rules to Managing Conflict and Improving Relationships, which is called Stay Off the Ladder. So if you want to know what that means, hang with us next week.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. You too.